Laura stood in the quiet observation room of the Deep Space Research Station, watching the faint lights of distant stars shimmer through the transparent wall. The room hummed with soft engines and the slow ticking of cooling panels. She had always felt calm in this place, but tonight the calm felt thin, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She leaned closer to the display as the sensor graphs drifted upward again. The strange pattern was back, stronger than before. Daniel entered the room carrying a tablet filled with fresh data sets. He was normally steady and composed, but even he could not hide the tension in his face. He set the tablet down beside Laura and studied the shifting waveforms with her. The graph pulsed in slow, unnerving rhythms, each rise larger than the last. He told her that the gravitational murmurs had increased again, and this time the frequency shift matched one of their more troubling predictions. Laura listened carefully, though she already knew what he would say. For weeks, their models had been warning them that something enormous was building in the far edges of the galaxy. Something unseen, something powerful, something no one had ever measured before. Humanity had always been careful when studying the unknown. It was one of the traits that made them different from many other species. While others rushed ahead at full speed, humanity paused, analyzed, and double-checked. This patience had led to many breakthroughs over the years, but it had also earned them a reputation among other civilizations as slow, overly cautious, and dramatic. Even when humans were right, it often took the galaxy a long time to admit it. Laura remembered the meeting 3 months earlier when she and Daniel first presented their findings to the Galactic Assembly. She had stood before hundreds of delegates and explained the early warning signs of a possible cosmic instability. The delegates had listened, but the room had filled with whispers and amused smiles. Some representatives openly dismissed the idea, calling it another example of human overreaction. Others insisted that the galaxy had gone unchanged for millions of years and that nothing could threaten their long-standing order. The assembly had thanked her and Daniel for their work, but nothing came of the presentation. No research funding, no emergency protocols, not even a request for further data. The matter was brushed aside, treated as a harmless curiosity, but the new readings made it clear that the threat was real. Daniel began sorting through the latest numbers while Laura activated the main projector. The room dimmed as the star map expanded around them. The image displayed thousands of stars and entire regions of space. Laura highlighted the affected zones. Slowly, a pattern appeared, a ring-like structure of weakening gravitational fields spreading outward sector by sector. Daniel pointed out that the rate of expansion had doubled. Laura felt a dull heaviness settle in her chest. She knew what this meant. The instability was no longer something they could watch quietly. It was something the galaxy needed to confront at once. She sent a message to Megan, a diplomat stationed at a nearby embassy. Megan had always taken human research seriously, and she often advocated for their findings even when the assembly ignored them. Megan agreed to meet immediately. They gathered in the station's central conference room. Megan sat across from them, her expression focused and concerned. Laura explained everything they had discovered since the first warnings. Daniel added details, showing the new projections and describing how the gravitational fields were losing strength in a synchronized pattern. Megan listened without interrupting. When they finished, she sighed softly and said that the assembly would not be pleased. They did not enjoy being told they were wrong, especially not by humans, but she agreed that they had no choice. The situation had reached a point where silence would be dangerous. Laura thanked her and prepared another formal request to the Galactic Assembly. This time, she wrote it more urgently, hoping it might convince them to act. The request was sent through official channels, but the reply came sooner than expected, and it was not a good one. The Assembly agreed to meet, but only to clarify misunderstandings and evaluate potential exaggerations in the human projection models. The wording made Daniel shake his head in frustration. Laura felt the same frustration but tried to stay patient. She reminded both herself and Daniel that their duty was to present the truth, even if others refused to accept it. 2 days later, Laura and Daniel traveled to the Galactic Assembly Hall, a massive chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of species. The hall was bright and vibrant, with walls that shimmered in soft metallic tones. Delegates spoke in hushed voices as Laura entered. Some nodded politely, but many looked at her with the same dismissive expression she remembered from their previous visit. When the meeting began, Laura activated the holographic display and showed the updated star map. She spoke clearly and simply. She explained that the galaxy was facing a phenomenon unlike anything recorded before. Daniel supported her with data, projections, and sensor logs. He showed a timeline indicating when certain sectors would begin to experience measurable effects. For a moment, the room was quiet. Then the objections began. Several delegates claimed that human sensors were unreliable. Others insisted that their own scientists had never reported anything similar. A few suggested that humans were trying to gain political influence by creating fear. One delegate even laughed loudly, saying that humans always expected disaster and should learn to relax. Laura stood still, keeping her expression neutral. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Megan watched from her seat, clearly disappointed in the reaction. When the assembly finally voted, the result was overwhelming. They denied the request for emergency action. They dismissed the new warnings. They claimed the galaxy had more important issues to deal with. Laura heard the vote results without surprise. She gave a final respectful bow, gathered her notes, and left the hall with Daniel. Megan caught up to them outside. Megan apologized for the assembly's behavior. She said they were blinded by their own confidence and had grown too secure in their long history of peace. She told Laura that she still believed in the research, and she urged them to continue their work. Whether the assembly listened or not, someone had to be prepared. Laura thanked her again and returned to the research station with Daniel. The trip back felt unusually silent. Daniel stared at the shifting light of the stars as they traveled. He finally spoke, saying he believed the galaxy would not take the warning seriously until something catastrophic happened. Laura wished he was wrong, but she suspected he was right. When they reached the station, they began working again without rest. They expanded their sensor network, running constant scans across multiple sectors. The data coming in was not encouraging. Each day brought stronger signals and new anomalies. Space-time seemed to twist and pulse in unnatural ways. Daniel built new models, adjusting for the rapid changes. Laura studied ancient records from previous eras, hoping to find historical traces of similar events. She found nothing. Whatever was happening was new, and the galaxy was not ready for it. Late one evening, while Laura reviewed a fresh batch of readings, the sensor alarms activated. A deep vibration echoed through the station, and the lights flickered. Daniel rushed into the room, alarmed. The readings on the main screen surged beyond all previous measurements. A distant region of space had just experienced a massive destabilization event. A ripple of collapsing gravitational fields had appeared, spreading fast. Laura's heart pounded as she realized what it meant. The first phase of the collapse had begun. She asked Daniel to check the location of the event. He did, and his voice grew quiet. It was in the Arinex Dominion, one of the largest and most technologically advanced empires in the region. They were proud, powerful, and unlikely to admit the danger. Laura notified Megan immediately. Megan sent the message onward, urging the assembly to respond. But the reply was slow. Hours passed and the situation grew worse. The Arinex Dominion reported sudden orbital disruptions around several of their worlds. Their scientists were confused and unprepared. They requested assistance, but only from neighboring allies. They did not ask humanity. Daniel looked at Laura with a troubled expression. He asked whether they should contact the Arinex leadership directly, but Laura shook her head. The Arinex would not believe them. Not yet. Megan finally called back. She sounded worried. She told Laura that the assembly had moved into an emergency session, but even now, some delegates believed the Arinex event was unrelated to the earlier warnings. Laura felt a cold frustration. The galaxy did not understand the scale of what was happening. They had lost precious time. Daniel approached her with the latest simulation. The projection showed that the collapse wave would continue spreading outward. It was not a local incident. It was the beginning of a chain reaction. Laura stared at the projection for a long moment. She knew the galaxy was about to change forever. She also knew that humanity could not wait for permission anymore. They would have to prepare on their own. She asked Daniel to start drafting a plan for a protective sensor grid. She told him that humanity had to gather as much information as possible. The galaxy might ignore them, but they still had a responsibility to survive. Daniel nodded and began his work. Laura stood beside the wide observation window as the stars glimmered calmly outside. She knew they were not calm at all. Behind that distant beauty, entire regions were beginning to crack. The galaxy had dismissed humanity's warnings. Now the consequences were coming. The collapse in the Aranex Dominion spread faster than anyone expected. In the Deep Space Research Station, Laura watched the next wave of fluctuations appear across the star map. The bright lines on the screen began to pulse in an uneven rhythm, creating a pattern that filled her with a sense of growing dread. Daniel stood beside her, tapping rapidly across his tablet as he checked the sensor readings. Every new number only confirmed the same truth. The instability was expanding. The Aranex leaders refused to admit the seriousness of the situation. Reports from their outer colonies spoke of dimming suns, unstable orbits, and strange gravitational noise that echoed through entire regions. Their scientists claimed they were investigating the matter, but their official statements still insisted that the situation was contained. Laura and Daniel knew this was not true. The research station received fragments of distress signals from small settlements near the edge of the Dominion. Ships fleeing those areas described violent shifts in space, as if invisible waves were pulling at their vessels. Some ships reported losing navigation control. Others disappeared without explanation. Daniel updated the projection model. When he finished, he called Laura to his workstation. She leaned over his shoulder as the model displayed a new map. The instability was no longer limited to one region. It was spreading outward in a slow but unstoppable circle. The outer sections of neighboring territories would soon feel the effects. Laura knew what this meant. If the galaxy did not act quickly, the collapse could grow strong enough to destabilize major star lanes. That would cut off trade routes, supply chains, and emergency services across dozens of systems. Entire civilizations could be isolated. Megan contacted them soon after the new data came in. Her voice sounded tight with concern. She explained that the Galactic Assembly had finally accepted that a crisis was unfolding, but the delegates still argued about the cause. Some believed the Aranex Dominion had performed an unstable experiment. Others thought the collapse was a natural phenomenon. A few even suggested that humanity was exaggerating the danger for political advantage. Laura tried to stay calm as she listened. Megan assured her that she was still pushing the assembly to take the matter seriously. She encouraged Laura to prepare another full report. The assembly needed updated projections. Daniel and Laura worked through the night gathering data. The station hummed with constant alerts as new sensor readings arrived. They added each piece to their growing files. Daniel refined the collapse timeline while Laura wrote explanations in simple and direct language, hoping clarity would help the assembly understand. By the next day, they had a full report ready. They sent it to Megan, who promised to present it immediately. Hours passed with no response. Then the news arrived. Another region had collapsed. This time it was not within the Aranex Dominion. It was a neighboring trade sector belonging to a smaller but important civilization known for its advanced mining colonies. Several of their asteroid belts suddenly destabilized, tearing apart automated mining structures. Their cargo fleets struggled to escape the spreading gravitational distortions. The second collapse created a shockwave across the galactic community. Trade routes shut down. Emergency broadcasts filled communication networks. Species that once ignored the warnings now spoke with fear in their voices. But even as fear spread, the assembly remained slow in making decisions. Laura and Daniel realized the galaxy was now in a dangerous moment. The collapses were no longer isolated. They were part of a chain reaction. Laura stepped away from the star map and looked around the research station. The people working there were calm but tense. They understood the stakes. Humanity had always relied on careful planning and cautious strategies. Now that caution was proving valuable. Daniel approached her quietly and told her something new. He had discovered that the collapse wave was accelerating faster than the earlier models predicted. Laura examined his calculations and saw that he was right. If nothing changed, the instability could reach the central regions of the galaxy within months. Megan contacted them again, sounding more stressed than before. She said that the assembly would finally meet for an emergency vote. She also warned them that some delegates still questioned humanity's role. Many felt uneasy about relying on human research, especially when the crisis was so large. Laura thanked her for the update and returned to the star map. She asked Daniel to highlight the next sectors likely to be affected. He marked several areas in bright red. Among them were colonies inhabited by peaceful species, groups with limited technology and no way to protect themselves. Laura felt a growing sense of responsibility. Humanity could not ignore this. She contacted a military analyst named Scott, a calm and experienced planner who had worked with her before. She explained the situation, and he listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her that he would begin drawing up defense preparations. Even if the assembly refused to act, humanity needed to prepare for the instability. Laura felt relieved to have his support. She asked him to coordinate with nearby fleets and to prepare evacuation plans in case the collapse reached human space. Meanwhile, Daniel worked on expanding the sensor network. He sent signals to deep space probes and reconfigured their paths. These sensors would give humanity early warnings if the instability moved closer. Time passed slowly as they waited for the assembly's decision. Finally, Megan contacted them with the results. The assembly had acknowledged the crisis, but the delegates had not agreed on a unified plan. Instead, they voted to form several separate committees to study the matter more deeply. Laura felt frustrated. The collapse was happening now. They did not have time for long debates. Megan apologized, even though none of it was her fault. She sounded tired and disappointed. She told Laura that some delegates still believed the crisis would slow down on its own. Others thought only the Arinex Dominion was affected. The assembly did not understand that the entire galaxy was at risk. Laura thanked her and ended the call. Daniel had been listening from across the room. He walked over and asked what they should do next. Laura thought for a moment. She told him that they would continue monitoring the instability and tracking its spread. They needed to be ready, even if the rest of the galaxy was not. Over the next several days, the collapse continued. Reports arrived from multiple regions. Ships went missing. Communication networks faltered. Small outposts disappeared entirely from star maps. The galaxy began to panic. Delegates who once dismissed humanity now contacted Megan and demanded more information. They wanted explanations. They wanted predictions. They wanted solutions they had once refused to consider. Megan relayed their questions to Laura and Daniel. They answered patiently, even though the delegates had ignored them before. Laura explained the models again. Daniel provided updated forecasts. This time, the delegates listened more closely. But listening was not enough. Laura knew they needed action, not only from the assembly but from humanity as well. She contacted Scott again and asked about the preparations. He told her that several fleets were now on alert. Evacuation ships were being moved to strategic locations. Deep space outposts were increasing their protective shields. He also told her something else. Humanity was considering creating a large sensor and stabilizer network that could slow the collapse. It would be difficult and dangerous, but it might work. Laura felt a spark of hope. She asked Daniel to study the idea with him. Meanwhile, more collapse events occurred. A star in a distant region flickered unpredictably. Another sun dimmed and sent out bursts of chaotic radiation. An entire sector lost stable gravity for several minutes, causing stations to drift out of their orbits. Laura realized this was only the beginning. One evening, she stood alone in the observation room. The stars outside looked peaceful, but she knew that peace was an illusion. The galaxy was breaking in slow, silent waves. Daniel entered the room quietly. He told her that the collapse wave had reached another border system. The system had already reported several missing ships. Laura closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the situation. She told him they needed to warn the system's leaders immediately. Daniel agreed. They prepared a message with clear instructions and sent it, but deep inside, Laura feared the message would come too late. The galaxy had ignored the first warnings. Now the cracks were spreading faster, darker, and more deadly. The first collapses had been terrible. The next ones would be far worse. Laura stood in the center of the research station's main control room as the latest collapse reports filled the screens. Each message carried the same grim pattern: regions losing stability, ships vanishing, and entire outposts drifting into dangerous space. The collapse wave was widening, and there was no sign it would slow down. Daniel worked beside her, typing quickly as he updated the new data into their models. Every line of numbers confirmed the same thing. The crisis was entering a faster phase. For weeks, they had warned the galaxy. Now the galaxy finally believed them, but belief came too late for many. The second and third collapse zones had already destroyed several trade routes. Refugees fled from one sector to another, hoping to find safe ground before the instability reached them. Some worlds were already abandoned. Others were fighting over scarce evacuation ships. Laura watched the star map rotate slowly. The bright red rings marking the collapse edges glowed like a spreading fire. She knew the damage would grow worse. The galaxy needed leadership, and at the moment, no one was stepping forward to take command. Megan contacted them, her voice tired. She had spent nearly every hour speaking with delegates, trying to convince them to work together. But even now, many leaders argued among themselves. Some wanted to protect only their territories. Others demanded that humanity hand over their research. A few still believed the crisis would not reach them. Laura asked her if the assembly had agreed on any major action. Megan sighed and said that they finally agreed to form a unified response team, but the team had no real authority yet. The delegates were still arguing over who should lead it. Daniel leaned closer and whispered to Laura that at this rate, the collapse would outrun every political debate. Laura agreed. She thanked Megan for the update and told her they would continue preparing their own response. After the call ended, Laura contacted Scott. She explained the situation, and he told her that humanity was ready to begin building the stabilizer network they had discussed earlier. The network would require carefully placed stations across many regions, each designed to slow the collapse wave. It would not stop the crisis, but it could reduce the damage and buy time for evacuations. Scott asked for confirmation to begin construction. Laura said yes. She knew the galaxy might not support them, but humanity could not wait. If they acted now, they could save millions of lives. Daniel joined her at the planning table. Together, they reviewed the design of the stabilizer network. The system used powerful energy fields that could reinforce the failing gravitational layers, but the stations had to be placed in precise positions. A mistake could destabilize entire regions. Laura and Daniel prepared the calculations needed for the placements. They sent the first coordinates to Scott. Scott then contacted the fleet leaders and assigned ships to carry the stabilizer modules to their deployment zones. The next few days were filled with non-stop work. Humanity began launching the first stabilizer stations into deep space. The research station tracked each module as it moved into position. The process was slow and dangerous, but every successful launch brought them one step closer to resisting the collapse. Meanwhile, more collapse events struck across the galaxy. Ships reported strange gravitational waves that caused engines to fail. Stations drifted off course. Planets trembled as their star systems shifted slightly. The galaxy's communication network struggled to keep up with the chaos. Megan contacted Laura again, this time with urgent news. Several civilizations that once ignored humanity were now requesting help. They had seen the stabilizer deployment and wanted to join it. They needed guidance and protection. Laura felt a mix of relief and sadness. The galaxy was finally waking up, but only because the situation had become impossible to deny. Megan asked if humanity was willing to cooperate with them. Laura said yes. Humanity had no desire to abandon others. She sent Daniel to prepare a simplified guide explaining the stabilizer system. He wrote it in clear and basic terms so that other species could follow it. Soon, the requests for assistance grew even more urgent. Some species begged for evacuation support. Others sent sensor readings, asking Laura and Daniel to confirm if their regions were in danger. Still others offered to share ships and supplies. Laura realized that the galaxy was becoming divided into two groups, those who accepted human leadership and those who still refused to trust them. Scott reported that some aggressive empires had taken advantage of the chaos and begun attacking weaker neighbors. The collapse had created confusion, and these empires saw a chance to expand their territory. Scott mobilized several human fleets to protect vulnerable regions. He did not want humanity to appear as conquerors, but he also refused to let chaos destroy more civilizations. In one operation, Scott's fleet rescued two small species that had been attacked by a larger empire. They escorted the refugees to a safe zone and then confronted the attackers. The battle was quick. The aggressive empire retreated, shocked that humanity had intervened so decisively. News of the operation spread quickly. Many species began to see humanity in a new light. They realized humans were not seeking power. They were trying to preserve the galaxy. As humanity's reputation grew, more civilizations turned to Laura for guidance. She accepted their questions and helped them calmly. Daniel assisted by expanding the stabilizer deployment plan, adding new routes and safe zones. But the collapse continued to deepen. One evening, while Laura reviewed the latest readings, Daniel rushed in with alarming news. The collapse wave had reached a major trade route in the central sectors. This route connected dozens of star systems. If it failed, those systems would be cut off. Laura studied the map. The collapse had moved faster than expected. It was like watching a giant shadow stretch across the galaxy. She contacted Scott and told him the news. He immediately ordered several fleets to move toward the threatened region. They would need to escort evacuation ships and stabilize the route if possible. Scott also asked Laura if the stabilizer network could handle the strain. She looked at Daniel, and he shook his head slowly. The network was strong, but not strong enough to protect every region without support. Laura told Scott that they needed help from other civilizations. Scott agreed. He said that humanity could not carry the burden alone. Megan then contacted Laura with a surprising message. Several members of the assembly now supported the idea of placing humanity in charge of the crisis response. They believed humanity's actions had proven they were capable. Laura felt a moment of disbelief. The same delegates who once mocked them were now turning to them for leadership. But she did not feel triumph. She felt responsibility. Megan explained that the assembly wanted Laura to present a full plan. They wanted humanity to show the galaxy what needed to happen next. Laura prepared the plan overnight. She described the stabilizer network, the evacuation routes, and the defense zones. She explained the dangers and the possible solutions. She wrote everything in simple terms so that every species, regardless of technology or language, could understand. When she finished, Megan told her that she would present the plan at the next emergency session. After the call ended, Laura went to the observation room. She looked at the stars, knowing that many of them were now at risk. Entire civilizations were depending on her work. Lives were being lost every day. She felt the weight of it all pressing on her. Daniel joined her quietly. He asked if she was ready for the next steps. She nodded slowly. She told him that if the assembly accepted the plan, humanity would carry a heavy burden. They would have to lead the galaxy through one of the greatest crises in history. Daniel placed the newest readings on the screen. The collapse wave glowed across the map like a spreading darkness. But now, scattered among the dark zones were small blue lights, the stabilizer stations that humanity had already deployed. They were tiny compared to the size of the galaxy, but each one represented hope. Laura stared at the map. She saw destruction, but she also saw possibility. Humanity could not stop the collapse, but they could slow it. They could save lives. They could give the galaxy a chance to survive. The next day, Megan contacted them with the results of the assembly meeting. The delegates had agreed, for the first time, to place humanity at the front of the crisis response. They voted to support the stabilizer network and to follow Laura's plan. Megan told Laura that the decision was not unanimous. Some delegates still doubted humanity. Others were afraid of losing their authority. But the majority now recognized that humanity understood the crisis better than anyone else. Laura thanked Megan for her work. She felt a deep sense of relief, but also a new pressure. The galaxy was turning to her. She had to be ready. Scott confirmed that the fleets were moving into position. Daniel continued refining the models. The research station prepared new stabilizer modules. Humanity was now fully engaged in the fight. As the collapse wave continued to expand, humanity stood at the center of a galaxy that finally understood the danger. The galaxy had ignored humanity's prophecies. Now they depended on humanity to survive. Laura stood with her hands resting on the edge of the main console as the newest wave of collapse reports flickered onto the screens. The lights in the research station dimmed slightly as power moved to the deep space sensors. The star map shifted slowly, showing the collapse wave pushing deeper into the central sectors. Entire regions were now marked in red, each one a reminder of what the galaxy had lost. Daniel worked near her in silence, his eyes fixed on the numbers scrolling down the display. For weeks, humanity had led the stabilizer network, giving guidance to dozens of civilizations that finally understood the danger. But the collapse did not slow as much as they hoped. Some sectors held steady for a time, but others fell within hours. Every day brought new messages of fear, confusion, and desperate requests for help. Laura looked at the map, her heart growing heavier. She knew what was coming. The collapse was entering its final stages. She knew they had already saved many lives, but she also knew that the worst part of the crisis was still ahead. Daniel approached her with a report. He explained that one of the largest sectors, home to several powerful species, had begun to lose stability. These were the same species that once dismissed humanity's warnings most loudly. Their leaders had mocked the early projections and refused to share their data. Now their systems were failing and they were sending urgent messages asking for help. Laura read the report quietly. She felt no sense of revenge, only exhaustion and responsibility. She told Daniel that they would help as much as they could, but they could not abandon the stabilizer network in other regions. If they focused too much on one area, several others would fall. Daniel nodded. He understood the choice was painful but necessary. Megan contacted them soon after. Her voice sounded strained. She said that the Galactic Assembly was in chaos. Several delegates were demanding that all resources be sent to the collapsing sector, while others refused to help the civilizations that once ignored the warnings. Megan asked Laura what humanity intended to do. Laura told her they would send evacuation ships and provide guidance, but they could not shift the stabilizer network. If they did, more systems would die. Megan agreed, though she said many delegates would not like the answer. Laura replied that liking the answer no longer mattered. The galaxy was running out of time. When the call ended, Laura returned to the planning table. She worked with Daniel to identify zones where humanity could safely send fleets. Scott joined them through a secure channel. He listened to the situation and immediately ordered evacuation missions. He also positioned defense fleets around key stabilizer stations. Many desperate groups would try to seize the stabilizers, believing they could protect their own worlds. Scott knew they had to be ready. Hours passed as the team worked through the crisis. The research station became a constant echo of alarms, updates, and emergency communications. But among the chaos, the stabilizer network continued to function. Each station held back the collapse just enough to give more refugees time to escape. One night when the station grew quiet for a moment, Laura stepped into the observation room. The stars outside shimmered gently, but she knew many of them were no longer truly stable. Some were already gone. Others were close to falling. She placed a hand on the transparent wall and stared at the distant lights. Daniel entered and stood beside her. He did not speak at first. They simply watched the stars together, both understanding how fragile the galaxy had become. After a moment, Daniel told her the newest projections. The collapse wave was approaching its peak. Soon, it would strike all remaining unstable regions in one massive surge. The stabilizer network could lessen the blow, but it could not stop it. Laura asked if the safe zones would hold. Daniel said they would, but only if the stabilizers remained in place for the final surge. If a stabilizer failed or was attacked, entire clusters could collapse. Laura sighed. She knew many desperate groups had begun targeting stabilizer platforms, hoping to control them. She told Daniel to send a message to Scott to reinforce all critical stations. The message was sent immediately. By morning, reports showed that the final stage of the collapse had begun. A massive wave of gravitational distortion swept across several sectors. Worlds turned dark. Stations lost their orbit. Ships vanished as the wave passed through their regions. The sector that once mocked humanity's warnings was among the first to fall. Their suns dimmed and flickered out within minutes. Their planets drifted into unstable positions. The entire region fell silent. Refugee ships escaped only because humanity had sent evacuation teams earlier. When Laura received confirmation of the collapse, she felt a hollow sadness. She did not feel triumph, only grief for the civilizations that had refused to listen until it was too late. Megan contacted her, sounding shaken. She said the assembly hall had fallen silent when the news arrived. Many delegates cried. Others stared at the floor, unable to speak. They realized that they had dismissed the warnings that could have saved them. Laura told Megan that the collapse was not over yet. They needed to focus on the remaining regions. Together with Daniel and Scott, she prepared the final stabilizer sequence. This sequence would strengthen the network for the last surge. It required a precise alignment of energy fields. If the timing was wrong, the stabilizers could overload. Scott coordinated the fleet movements. Ships rushed to protect the stations. Megan handled diplomatic channels, urging all surviving civilizations to follow the final instructions. The countdown began. As the galaxy braced for the final collapse, the research station grew tense. Everyone stood at their consoles, ready to react. Laura monitored the stabilizer network, checking every signal. Daniel handled the energy flow calculations. Scott's voice echoed through the channel with updates from across the fleets. The collapse wave struck. The lights in the station flickered. The star map shook with unstable readings. A deep vibration moved through the hull. Alarms blared. The collapse wave swept across the galaxy like a storm of darkness. But the stabilizer network held. The stations glowed brightly as they absorbed the shock. Some flickered dangerously. One came close to failing but was supported by a nearby station. The fleets guarding them held their positions, defending against desperate groups and unpredictable gravitational shifts. After several long minutes, the readings began to stabilize. The collapse wave slowed and then faded. The stabilizers continued to glow softly, their energy field steady. The final surge had passed. Laura let out a breath she did not realize she was holding. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhausted. The entire station felt a wave of relief. They had survived the most dangerous moment in galactic history. Megan contacted them immediately. She spoke with a trembling voice, saying that the assembly had confirmed the collapse was over. Many regions had fallen, but the remaining ones were now safe. The stabilizer network had saved millions. Laura thanked her and asked for a full report. Megan said it would take time. The galaxy was smaller now. Many civilizations were gone. Others had scattered. But what remained was stable. Scott contacted them next. He reported that the fleets were safe. They had prevented multiple attacks and protected the stabilizers until the end. He sounded tired but proud. Laura thanked him for everything he had done. Later, when the station quieted again, Laura returned to the observation room. She looked at the stars, knowing many were now extinguished. But she also knew that many still remained. The galaxy had survived, though it would never be the same. Daniel joined her once more. He said that humanity had done more than anyone expected. They had not only predicted the collapse, but had helped countless civilizations survive it. Laura nodded. She said they had done what they had to do. Humanity had not asked to lead the galaxy, but the galaxy had turned to them when there was no one else. Outside the window, the stars shone faintly. Some were new, some were old. The pattern of the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity emerged not as conquerors, but as guardians. They had warned the galaxy. The galaxy had ignored them. And now, after the collapse, those who survived would remember the ones who had saved them. A new age was beginning, shaped not by fear or pride, but by the lessons of the collapse and the quiet strength of humanity. Laura stood quietly, watching the lights of distant space. She knew the work was not finished, but she also knew they had given the galaxy a future. And for the first time in many weeks, she allowed herself to feel hope.